morning, everybody. It is 6 a.m. in the morning. I've been awake for 24 hours straight. Um, this insomnia took its toll. I'm usually able to get some sleep, but it didn't work out for me this way today. So I'm running on fumes right now. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to release this video, but I just felt like getting some things off my chest. I'm your confidence coach who's having a challenging day. Life is not all gumdrops, rainbows, sunshines. But I'm going to try my best to push through what I'm feeling right now. I disappeared off of social media for about 8 months to try to cope with my grief. The grief of my mom being in hospice. My mom was a single mother to 4 children, and she resented being a mother every single day. And she reminded us every single day that she wished that she had done life all by herself. So I was forced to raise myself. I had a very tumultuous childhood. I mean, emotional abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse. And each one of my mother's children had to be out of the house by the time we were teenagers. Whether we were ready to enter the world and navigate life or not, it didn't matter. We had to get out. It was a sink or swim situation for every single one of my siblings. I didn't have any guidance. I didn't have any family that stepped up. So I was forced to literally raise myself. I grew up in the inner city, the heart of the hood, Paterson, New Jersey. There were pimps, prostitutes, heroin addicts, crack addicts, weed heads, thugs, you name it. I grew up around that. Ever since the kindergarten, I've been dressing myself, making my own breakfast, and walking myself to school. There was nobody there looking after this little black girl. I had to fend for myself. And because I had no role models, and I had no family that I was connected to, I looked to celebrities like Oprah and Bill Cosby to be my guiding strength. I always said, since I didn't have a mother that wanted me, if I ever had the chance to choose my mother, I would choose Oprah. And not because of her fame, and not because of her money, but because of the principles that she stood by and all the adversity that she overcame. And she didn't let her childhood abuse, her molestations, define who she was. So every time my mom had a bad day, she was sure to take it out on her children in a physical way. She'd beat us with 2x4s, plastic bats, belts. One time, she whipped me like a slave with with an extension cord until the flesh on my body was completely raw. I was a little girl. So I used to watch The Cosby Show. That was my guilty pleasure. And after The Cosby Show, there was a spinoff called A Different World. I had no idea that people could go away to college and live on campus and get an education and change their lives. So when I was a little girl, I finally figured out my ticket out of the hood and the abuse. My father abandoned me when I was about 6 years old. I remember standing on the porch on Hamilton Avenue in Paterson, New Jersey, when my father walked away and never once looked back. And I remember looking up into my mother's eyes and seeing nothing but yet another disappointment, because I was her fourth child. But my father was her third baby's father. I never met any of my grandparents. I know what two of them look like because I saw two pictures in their older age. I lived in the same city as all my aunts, all my uncles, and all my cousins on my father's side. And I was never once introduced to them. I didn't even know they existed. My mother wasn't interested in us meeting them. She was interested in her beating us to relieve her stress, to relieve her pain. So every year, I would do a mental countdown and say, in 9 more years, I'm going to college. I get to move out. I'm going to move on campus and live on the dorms. And I'm going to live my life and become the woman that I want to be. To avoid the conflict at home, I played small. I tried my best to keep quiet. But when my mother would call me bitch, and when she would call me a hoe, and when she would call me a slut, and I was just an 11-year-old virgin, I didn't understand what life had in store for me. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have any relatives. I think that God looked down on me as a child and said, this poor little girl is going to need a whole lot of help. And I'm going to instill some values in her that nobody else is going to instill in her. And by the grace of God, every time I saw a crackhead, I vowed to never touch crack. Every time I saw a heroin addict, I vowed to never, ever touch heroin. In my neighborhood, I used to walk to schools stepping over used heroin needles, hoping that I didn't get pricked. My best friend, body, had drugs taped to her. And whenever her mother needed to make a drug deal, she'd call out her name from the window. She'd run to the house. Her mother would lift her shirt. She would unstrap the drugs, sell it to the customer, and send her right back outside to play with me. And it was just my norm. And when I saw that, I vowed to myself, I'll never sell drugs. God had instilled in me that there is something greater for you. I start this story with all this candid information because I am the classic example of a little black girl who was never properly looked after. When I went to college, I knew that I could never go back home. There was no place for me there. My mom didn't want me there. So luckily, right after college, I landed a job in Wall Street. I trained stockbrokers on computer system. I excelled in academia. I went above and beyond to be the complete opposite of what I grew up around. Eventually, I attained a decent level of success, saved up some money, and purchased a house. I never, ever felt good about my success. In fact, I felt guilty. I felt guilty that my mom dedicated her life to 4 children, all by herself, without any child support. So the good daughter that I am, the good human being that I am, I invited her to move into the brand new home that I bought. It was a 3-level, so I had a rental income coming in as well while working at the brokerage firm. About a month after my mom moved in, we had a disagreement. I wanted to work it out. She did it. A month after moving into our new home, she completely cut me off. She lived upstairs from me for 5 years and would never let me inside of her apartment. I had only been in her apartment twice. If I knocked on the door, she'd crack the door, peek through, and say, "What do you want?" And I would say, "I was just wondering if we could talk, if we could make amends, because we're family. You live right upstairs from me." And she would reject my advances to improve our relationship. And so after 5 years of rejection and a broken heart, I decided that it was absolute time for me to sell that house and get away from that toxic environment. As a result, my mother abandoned me. She moved out. She never told me where she moved. And she told me she wasn't ready to have a relationship with me and to not bother her anymore. So I resigned to the fact that I would never have a mother again. I made peace with it. I went to therapy. I thrived in life. I moved to a new state. I met new people. And that's why the friends in my life, I adore them. I worship them. I'm super loyal to them because my friends are the family that I get to choose. So let's fast forward a bit. I fell on hard times. I had nobody to call. I was vulnerable. I was alone, but I was a fighter. So I worked 2 jobs. I hustled to get my money up, to get back on my feet, so that I didn't have to rely on any man or be exploited by any man because I was vulnerable. See, when you're a little black girl who's not properly looked after, men, they can sense that and they will exploit you. And then you end up trapped in situations and relationships that don't serve you. And it takes a big toll on your self-esteem. And you could really lose yourself. And you could really go downhill. But I've always been a fighter. I wasn't going out like that. I was an educator. And I felt that my life story was my life passion. So I wanted to give back to underprivileged youth who needed some guidance, who wasn't fortunate enough to have God's mercy sprinkled upon them because there was nobody else around to give them guidance. They were just lost souls, young lost souls, misguided youth. So even today, it's my passion to help the underprivileged youth realize their full potential. I recently got hired as a professor at the C School in Miami for underprivileged youth. And I'm going to give them every ounce of love, respect, and guidance that I wish I had, I should have had, and I needed. I start on Monday, and right now it's Sunday. So tomorrow is my first big day. So even though I feel like I have a ton of bricks on my shoulders, I'm going to leave my problems at home and greet those children at the door with the biggest smile on my face. So I've accepted the fact that I didn't have a mother. I accepted the fact that I didn't have a father. I accepted the fact that I didn't know any of my family. And I didn't get to know my father's side of my family until I was about 28, 29 years old. I was working at Passaic County Technical Institute in Wayne, my alma mater. I went to high school there and then went back to teach there. I was doing CAF duty. And a young girl, a student there, she walked up to me and she said, "Is your father's name Calvin?" And because I didn't know him, didn't respect him, I didn't really want to claim him. But she's asking for a reason. She must know him. So I said, yes, he was my father. She said, "I thought so." She said, "I'm your cousin. My mom and your father are brothers and sisters, so we're first cousin. We're family. And another one of your cousins are over there having lunch." And I was about 28, 29 at the time. Shortly after that, I moved to Florida. So I didn't have the opportunity to connect with them and go to family events, Thanksgivings, Christmas, cookouts. Maybe I went to one or two, but that was about it because I lived out of state, 2,000 miles away. So I went on to live my best life and just thrive in spite of the adversity. I was estranged from my mother for many years. I sent her a calendar, chicken noodle soup for the soul. And I told her that it was important that we got therapy and try to mend these wounds because we're family. I'm her only daughter. She's my only mother. And we're all we've got. She told me she wasn't ready, not to bother her anymore. And that, in fact, she wished I was never born. I said, okay. I'm glad that I was born, but I wish I was never born through you. That's what I told her. I said, after having 4 children and 3 baby daddies, and none of them married you, why would you go ahead and have a 4th child? Hence the reason why I absolutely refused to be any man's baby's mama. If you want a baby to journey through my temple, you need to be committed to us. Me, my temple, our child, and we need to be a family. And I refuse to settle. Fast forward 10 years later of being estranged from my mom, being abandoned by my mom, I finally get a phone call from her. Why? Because she was sick and she needed me. When she was healthy, she wanted nothing to do with me. But when she was ill, she needed me. So she called me for help. And it took every ounce of energy in my body to even entertain that conversation. I almost felt like That was karma for the way you treated me and my brothers. When my husband, who comes from a very close-knit family, very close-knit religious family, he pressured me and encouraged me to go there to New Jersey, look after my mother, take care of her, make sure she was okay. It was very difficult. I slipped into a depression because I didn't have the opportunity to have closure with the abandonment and all the pain that it caused. So a woman who told me that she was never born and that she hated me and didn't want anything to do with me, I was now her 24/7 primary caregiver. And I guess my heart was just too big to watch her die alone. So I sacrificed as a newlywed, moved into her apartment, cooked her breakfast, lunch, and dinner, helped her to the bathroom, helped her bathe, took her to every single doctor's appointment, advocated for her health, took her to every single specialist that I possibly can, all while being depressed myself and so confused about the dynamic of this relationship, and also feeling used and also still feeling abused. In an effort to save my marriage, I agreed to bring her to Florida to move in with me. And I was going to take her to the best doctors, insurance and money could buy. And I had all these grand plans. The time that I spent taking care of her, I realized that her sickness and her age, it humbled and softened her. And I was actually able to ask her some questions, get a little bit of closure, and understand that she really did the best that she knew how. She just wasn't mother material. No one ever taught her. I learned that her mother died when she was 9 years old. So she was raised by her grandfather. Pardon me, she was raised by her grandmother because her father didn't want to be responsible for a daughter, so he only took her brother. So after making all these grand plans to heal my mother, I told her that I would take her back to her home in Patterson. And I would take her for a long weekend, a nice long little weekend, like from Thursday to Monday, like an extended weekend, to one of her favorite places, Atlantic City, so that she could gamble and enjoy herself. Well, 2 weeks after making those plans, God made other plans. She collapsed in the bathroom after numerous falls in her house, in her yard, and I was concerned. So I took her to one of the top 5 hospitals in the nation in Pembroke Pines, and I demanded that they call in the top neurologist to assess my mother because I desperately needed a diagnosis. I didn't know what else to do. At that point, I was making plans to bring her back home. Well, as luck would have it, the best neurologist showed up and told me that my mother had a rare brain condition that's not easily detectable through a brain scan, and only experienced neurosurgeons were able to identify the issue. My mother was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy. It's a degenerative brain disease with an estimated life expectancy of 7 years. My mother had already been enduring this disease for 5.5 years. So she was at the tail end of her life expectancy at the age of 64. Even though I wasn't close with my mother, she was still my mother. And that news hit me like a ton of bricks. It completely turned my world upside down. The doctors came in the next day to complete the assessment. She failed the swallow test. She could no longer eat food. They had to feed her through a peg tube through her stomach. She lost her vision, all muscle strength, her ability to walk. She became wheelchair and bedbound. A woman who was once vibrant, walked every day, always maintained her figure, very active, very outgoing, now a complete invalid. And I'm not only her primary caregiver, but I'm also her primary attorney. Her power of attorney. And I'm heartbroken. And I'm trying my hardest to deal with my own depression. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, my husband is the breadwinner. So he was out of the country or out of the state 90% of the time. So I was here in this beautiful, gorgeous city of Miami with so much to do, with no desire to do anything and no ability because I was a full-time caregiver. So the responsibility became too great. My mom needed 24-hour care, round the clock. She needed trained professionals. And I just didn't have the mental or physical strength to help her because I had to undergo fibroid surgery that almost killed me, by the way. I had a 22-day long period. And by the time I got to the doctor, they said they weren't even going to charge me. They told me to go home, pack a bag, and go straight to the emergency room. When I got to the emergency room, they took me right in. And they said, Miss Stevens, I've got to tell you, I'm glad you came when you did because you have half the amount of blood required in your body to live. And if you didn't come when you did, any day now, you were going to have a stroke or a heart attack. So they rushed me in for an emergency blood transfusion and an emergency surgery. Because I was out of work, being the primary caregiver for my mom, I didn't have insurance. So I had to suffer for a whole year with debilitating monthly cycles that created anxiety, depression, and downright hopelessness. I was finally able to get Obamacare, and I got that $87,000 surgery that I desperately needed to save my life. So while being my own primary caregiver, I was my mother's primary caregiver and her power of attorney. And I took in a homeless family member who used me for every little bit of things, for every little bit that I had left, ate me out of a house and home, and called me every name in the book when I called him out on his disrespectful behavior. Let's just say I was going through a lot. So I disappeared off social media and I said, I have two choices. I'm going to treat my suicidal depression because I fell into a deep, deep depression. I've been through a lot of things, but I've never been depressed like that. So I said, I'm going to treat this suicidal depression and rebuild my life from the bottom up, or I'm going to end it. And obviously, I chose to fight for my life and live my best life. This is not a story that I share with people ever at all. There are a few close people in my life that know my pain, that knows my struggle, that knows my heartbreak. So when they see me on social media now, just working hard to uplift myself and also uplift others, they're just so happy that I'm in a better place. But even though I'm in a better place, I still have really tough days. But I give myself a pep talk and I remind myself that I am a phoenix, okay? And I will rise from the ashes and excel. Set goals, crush them, and create the life that I want and deserve. So now I sit here before you with one of those heavy days because whenever I have to walk through the doors of hospice, I am absolutely terrified, but more importantly, I'm absolutely alone. And I'm a strong woman, but I'm absolutely terrified about losing my mother. It is difficult for me to get in the car and let alone drive to the hospice facility. But it takes me at least 15 minutes to get out of the car because I usually break down, my anxiety's through the roof, and I cry because I feel so sorry for her. And every time I go see her, my heart breaks a little more each time. And I'm helpless. There's nothing I can do. Her condition is terminal. And I asked her the last time I saw her, I said, "Are you fighting to stay alive?" And she squeezed my hand and she said, "Every day." And she said, "I want to thank you for being there for me, taking care of me, and being a good daughter." She said, "I wouldn't have made it this far without you. I would have died all alone in my apartment if you didn't come to my rescue." And she said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for everything that I've ever done to hurt you." And I really appreciated that apology. My mother was a proud woman. She would never, ever apologize. And for the first time in my whole life, at the age of 41 years old, I hugged my mother and broke down in her arms and laid my head on her bosom and told her that I loved her and that I was sorry that all of this was happening to her. And she just told me, it's okay. She's doing fine. She's not in any pain. And she prays to God every day. And so my originally planned podcast, obviously I had a rough time getting through it. But I wanted to reach out to you guys and let you know that there are so many people going through very difficult times. And you don't know what they're going through because they're not wearing it on their person. So my advice is to lend somebody a helping hand when they need it. Give someone forgiveness whether they deserve it or not. Be kind to someone because you never know if you can make or break a person's day. I'm usually not this transparent with a bunch of people that I don't know. But I've evolved. I'm at a different place now. I'm confident enough to know that this tragedy does not define me. It's just one aspect of my very multifaceted life. So in honor of my mother, who I'm absolutely terrified of watching take her last breath, I'm going to be as strong as she is, push through, and create the life that I want and deserve. And I encourage every single person out there to push through your adversity. If you're feeling depressed, sad, irritable, cranky for longer than 2 weeks, please, please go see a mental health professional. It only gets worse. Through my experience, I learned that there's 2 types of depression. I thought depressed people just laid in the bed and cried all day. And since I wasn't doing that, I didn't know that I was depressed. I didn't know I was deeply depressed. I didn't know I was suicidally depressed. The other type of depression is agitated depression. Well, you're not crying all the time. You're crying sometimes, but more often than not, you're angry. So I just thought I had anger management issues because I had taken on too much and I was doing too much. And I just felt like I was at my breaking point. But I was literally dying slowly from a broken heart. And I got to a point where I started to self-medicate because I was in so much emotional pain that I just didn't think I would ever get out. And so one day I woke up, I opened my eyes, I put my feet on the floor, and I thought to myself, dear God, why did you wake me up? I have to endure yet another day of this excruciating pain. And when I got to the point where I was able to say out loud, I don't want to be here anymore, I checked myself in to a psychiatric ward to get help for my depression because I don't like drugs. I don't do drugs. I don't even like alcohol. But I like the drugs better than I like the emotional pain. And all I could think about was, if you keep messing around and self-medicating, you're going to form an addiction. And then you're going to end up like those heroin addicts or those crackheads or those prostitutes that you vowed to never become when you were 5 years old. So the 5-year-old version of me was on my shoulder, literally talking to me, saying, hey, wake up, get it together. Addiction, that's not what we do. You need help. I understand you're in pain, so go get pain, because what you're doing is not helping, it's only hurting. So I checked myself in. I only spent a day there. I had an evaluation. I was prescribed an antidepressant to help me sleep, to stabilize my mood, and to just give me some semblance of peace. And it was helpful. I stayed on it for a couple of months. I got off it, and then I completely changed my diet and my lifestyle. And I started taking an all-natural supplement called 5-HTP. It's the same stuff I heard Jim Carrey talking about. And then from there, I vowed to make self-care my number one priority.